So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah!
The Detroit Lions are in desperate need of a cornerback one. Last offseason, the Detroit Lions signed Cam Sutton to a 3-year, $33 million contract to come in and be that cornerback one in the Lions secondary. Unfortunately, after a strong start to the season, Cam Sutton started to fall off towards the end and really showed that if he could play it in a pinch, if he has to play due to injury, he can be the cornerback one, but really he should probably be more of that cornerback two, leaving a wide open gap and a wide open position for the Detroit Lions to address this offseason. Now, while a lot of people are going to say, well, look to the draft for your cornerback one or look somewhere else for your CB1 to get a young guy for a long-term contract, the reality is that the draft is very unpredictable. There's a really good chance that with the Lions picking at 29, they're either not going to be able to trade up for one of the top cornerbacks in the class, or one of the top cornerbacks will not fall to the 29th overall selection. So the best way the Detroit Lions can attack that is probably through free agency. But the problem is there aren't a ton of great cornerback ones in free agency, right? Patrick Surtain is not hitting the open market. Jalen Ramsey is not hitting free agency. None of the elite cornerback ones that the Lions need are going to be true options for this team. But there is a veteran out there. There is a player that has been the cornerback one for a lot of teams over the last 5, 6, 7 years. He's a player that has been a great cornerback in the NFL for a long time. And that player is Stephon Gilmore, the former Defensive Player of the Year, former All-Pro, former first-round pick, and former Pro Bowl corner, most recently of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, Stephon Gilmore is 33 years old and is an older cornerback. By no means is this a long-term solution, but I do think this could potentially be more of one of those Band-Aid free agency signings that, hey, if you don't get your guy in the draft, right, if you can't trade up for a Teron Arnold or a Kool-Aid McKinstry, if, Quinyon Mitchell doesn't fall to 29, or if Cooper DeJean doesn't get to 29, if you don't get a cornerback in the first or second round, Stephon Gilmore can certainly fill in for a year and play like a solid cornerback one and potentially help develop one of the mid to late round players you do end up selecting in the NFL draft. So we're going to take a look at Stephon Gilmore today. There's a lot of people talking about him, obviously the big name factor, but really I want to take a look at whether he's kind of coasting off of that name factor or whether he can still be a true cornerback one for the Lions. Now, Stephon Gilmore was a first-round pick, the 10th overall pick several seasons ago. He's a 5-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time All-Pro, a Super Bowl champion, as well as the 2019 Defensive Player of the Year. Stephon Gilmore is 33 years old and will be 34, I believe, going into the 2024 season. He's played 12 seasons in the NFL, made 158 starts, and as of right now, his projected value on the open market is roughly about $11 million. Which for a 34-year-old player is quite a lot, right? But Stephon Gilmore is still playing at a relatively high level, and he is still a really, really good player and was great for the Dallas Cowboys a season ago. Now, it is true that Stephon Gilmore has had a statistical drop-off over the last 2 seasons. He was an elite Defensive Player of the Year candidate for many, many years in New England. And then he went to Carolina and kind of had a down year. Then he went to Indianapolis and again had kind of a down year. And then he went to Dallas where he was really good. But again, statistically from his time back in New England, he really isn't quite the same player. But for kind of a Band-Aid 1-year signing, a 1-year, $11 million contract for a team that is 7th in the NFL in cap space and has a glaring need at cornerback could be really, really good. Now, I watched quite a bit of Cowboys tape before making this video just to research how far Stephon Gilmore has truly fallen. And despite being an older prospect, despite being an older player, there really isn't that big of a drop off, at least athletically, from where he was a couple of years ago to right now. I mean, even going back to last year with the Cowboys, I mean, he's running stride for stride down the sideline with guys like Terry McLaurin, with DK Metcalf, with some of the bigger, faster, more athletic players in the league. And Stephon Gilmore is step for step with those guys. He does not really get beat deep that often. He's not a player that gives up big plays down the field. He very much has not lost a step yet, and he is a guy that can still go toe-to-toe with some of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Now, taking a look at Stephon Gilmore last season, he played in all 17 games for the Dallas Cowboys, including the 18th game in the wild card weekend. He had 68 tackles for the Cowboys last year, 13 passes defended, 2 interceptions, as well as a forced fumble. Taking a look at what he did through the air at some of the more advanced statistics, Stephon Gilmore was targeted 91 times on the season. A large part of that has to do with Deron Bland having 5 pick sixes and people really not wanting to test that guy because either Deron Bland was going to give up a big play or he was really going to hurt you and come away with a massive interception. So they'd rather trust the veteran. They'd rather trust the guy that doesn't have the turnover production in Stephon Gilmore. I mean, he saw a lot of targets, 91 targets on the season, had a 50 catches allowed, which is about 55.8%, which would be better than almost every cornerback on the Lions roster last year, had a 74.4 PFF grade, as well as having a quarterback rating allowed of 82.7. Now, again, Stephon Gilmore is not the defensive player of the year anymore. He is not a guy that's going to allow, less than a 50% completion percentage. He's not going to be a guy that's coming away with 4-5 picks in a season. He's not going to be a guy that is going to be probably named to the Pro Bowl or named to the All-Pro team anytime soon, but that doesn't mean he can't improve the Detroit Lions secondary. He would easily come in on day one and be the number one cornerback for the Detroit Lions immediately. And I think a duo of Stephon Gilmore and Cam Sutton on the boundary with Brian Branch on the interior with Ifeatu Melifonwu and Kirby Joseph over the top would be a really, really strong secondary. And it might not be the best, right? There's no Sauce Gardner. There's no Pat Surtain. There's no Jalen Ramsey in that secondary, but there are 2 really good starting caliber cornerbacks, a guy that has been cornerback 1 for a long time in the NFL and has the experience, and a guy that was cornerback 1 last year, now being switched over to cornerback 2 on the opposite side. I think that would be a really good cornerback 1 and cornerback 2 duo, and then you can still go out and get a player, right? If you want to go out and you want to trade up for a Teron Arnold, you want to trade up for a Kool-Aid McKinstry, you want to trade up a couple spots for a Kenyon Mitchell from Toledo, right? You can still do those things, but now you don't have to. Now you don't necessarily need to force that draft pick immediately because you have a 1-year gap, right? You have a 1-year stop player. And if you're able to get your cornerback of the future, that's great. If you can get Cooper DeJean, if you can get Nate Wiggins, if you can get Lassiter from Georgia or Mitchell from Toledo or either of the Bama cornerbacks, any of those 6, that would be your cornerback of the future. You can develop, bring along a little slowly. And once he's ready to play, you play the young guy and let him be impactful. Find a way to get him on the field. But if you get to the 29th overall pick, or even if you get to the mid-20s and, 4 or 5 corners are off the board, you don't have to sell the house, right? You don't have to sell the farm to move up to get the last remaining top-tier corner in this draft because you have Stephon Gilmore for another year. And I think you can wait for a guy like maybe Kyrie Jackson in the 2nd or 3rd round. You can wait for, one of the Missouri cornerbacks in the 2nd or 3rd round until later in the draft. And again, bring on those guys slower because they don't have to be thrust into starting action immediately with a guy like Stephon Gilmore on the roster. So while a lot of people are going to look at it and say, yeah, but Stephon Gilmore is really old. Stephon Gilmore is 33. Stephon Gilmore is not the same player he used to be. Those things are all true, but this isn't a scenario necessarily where the Lions need an all-pro, right? They don't need Sauce Gardner. They don't need prime Jalen Ramsey. They don't need even like a prime Darius Slay, right? They need somebody that can play cornerback 1 and not be a major liability. And I think Stephon Gilmore, if nothing else, can fill that role for the Detroit Lions. For a 1-year, $11 million contract, that is not bad value for a player of Stephon Gilmore's caliber. It would bring in an immediate cornerback 1 for the team, and I think it would really help solidify the roster and the secondary. Again, if this move does happen and then they end up drafting a guy in the second, third, or even in the first round still, your secondary goes from being the 27th ranking secondary in the NFL with no true cornerback one, no true cornerback two, really nothing solidified in the cornerback room, to having Stephon Gilmore as your cornerback one. Not a great, not an elite cornerback one, but certainly a cornerback one in the NFL. Cornerback two being Cam Sutton, who was really good to start the year and I think would thrive with just a little bit less pressure. Even though he gave up a lot of yards towards the end of the season, he still had quite a few big plays throughout the year. Right, your cornerback three, your slot cornerback is going to be Brian Branch. Your cornerback four, your backup boundary guy, can be the player you draft in the second or third round. That's 4 cornerback deep right there. And then you have guys like Chase Lucas and Stephon Gilmore, Stephon Gilmore's brother, to be kind of the backups there. And I think you can add some really good talent. I think you can turn this secondary from being kind of a liability into being maybe not the strength of the defense, but certainly a very strong complement to the defense. So with all of that being said, that is my pitch for Stephon Gilmore. Let me know down in the comments below what you'd be willing to pay for Stephon Gilmore, as well whether you think it would be a good signing in general. I'd be very curious what you guys have to say. Well, all of that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.